station. Always trust your gut.
Hello, my name is Chrissy Champagne. You are listening to Residue, a true crime podcast dedicated to keeping you paranoid. Residue is not just another true crime podcast, but a necessary tool for those who want to understand the dangers lurking in the real world. I do need to offer the biggest trigger warning that you have ever heard for this episode. There will be graphic depictions of child sexual assault and murder. There will be discussions of suicide and triggering content related to sexual assault. I am giving the biggest trigger warning ever for this episode. I'm going to be quite honest with all of you. I had a really hard time finishing the book titled Pure Murder by Corey Mitchell. Throughout the episode, I will try to give you exact trigger warnings before I speak of something, but I just really want to emphasize listener discretion is advised. You are listening to episode 65, part 2, titled Crossing Paths with Evil, the Jennifer Ertman and Elizabeth Pena story.
Why can't they put a belt around their neck? Why can't they stop them down with their feet like that, stomp them down to the ground till they're dead? And why not lay there for an hour and let them die?
In part 1 of Crossing Paths with Evil, we left you with the fact that Jennifer and Elizabeth were late for curfew, so they decided to take a shortcut through TC Jester Park to be able to arrive home in time. So this is part 2. If you have not listened to part 1, I would go back and do that. Episode 65, part 1. In the middle of TC Jester Park, the air was thick with tension. You could hear the clink of beer bottles as 18 boys, bruised and beaten from a gang initiation, sat around speaking about how they would always have each other's back in this gang called the Black and White Gang. But Frank Sandoval, as you remember, the twin of Ramon Sandoval, he felt something gnawing at him, something he couldn't quite place, but it was enough to make the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He leaned inward towards his twin brother, Ramon, and he whispered, "I think that we got to get out of here." Now, Frank's voice is low and urgent. "Ramon, I don't know, man. I've got a bad feeling about this. We need to leave." Ramon's just laughing it off, shrugging it off. Ramon's drunk, and he's having the time of his life right now with his pals. He didn't want this night to end, but his twin brother, Frank, his eyes looked serious. He had a weird tone. It was the kind of look he gave him that only twins can understand. "Come on, man," Frank insisted, his voice quieter now, but unwavering. He's like, "Dude, I don't trust these dudes." Ramon hesitates, he sighs, but he gives in. Both boys stand up, dust off their jeans. They're walking away from this circle of friends. They look back and they're like, "Listen, guys, we gotta go. We gotta get home. We're gonna be late for curfew." They get teased a little bit, but Frank and Ramon are now on their way back up the path, leaving TC Jester Park. And as the brothers are walking back up the path to get home, they spot Jennifer and Elizabeth straight ahead coming towards them. So obviously, what's the best thing for Frank and Ramon to do? Oh, it would be to tell Jennifer and Elizabeth, "Hey, you might want to turn around and just take the long way home because there's a group of boys down there and they're not the nicest group of boys you're going to come across tonight." But do Frank and Ramon do that? No, of course they fucking don't. So Frank and Ramon just keep their little mouths shut. They keep walking. They didn't warn them to turn around. They should have definitely done that, but they didn't. And this would be the first mistake. Only minutes later, Joe Medellin and his younger brother Uni, who had been hanging out with the group all night, they made the decision to leave too. Uni had a curfew at only age 14, and Joe just thought, "Okay, I'll walk my little brother home. Let's leave." So now Joe and Uni are on the path, right behind Frank and Ramon, not too far behind them. It is now that Joe and Uni are going to notice Jennifer and Elizabeth walking towards them. And as Jennifer and Elizabeth get closer to Joe stares both girls down and he just says out loud, "Oh, well, look at this. What do we have here?" And immediately grabs Elizabeth's breast. Then he grabs her hand and he says, "Where are you going, girl? You ain't going nowhere, bitch." Grabs her neck, places her in a chokehold. Elizabeth is screaming for help. And I'm just going to say this right here. I had to stop reading this book so many times. I suggest, just to give you a heads up, chapters 18, 19. It's brutal. I was physically shaking. I wanted to throw up. So I'm not going to go into graphic detail about what happened to the girls because I don't think anybody needs to hear that. If you want to read the book, it is called Pure Murder by Corey Mitchell. It's going to get pretty rough and brutal from this point on. Joe has Elizabeth in a chokehold, a 16-year-old girl, at 10:45 p.m. Jennifer is standing there not knowing what to do, but Jennifer has enough time to get away. She doesn't go, though, because she's not going to leave her best friend there in this position. So Jennifer stays. At this point, Frank Sandoval can hear the screams as he's walking off the path to go home, but he doesn't do anything. He keeps walking. Jennifer is so far past the boys and she can run, but this 14-year-old girl runs back to Elizabeth. Sean O'Brien and Peter Cantu grab Jennifer as she's running towards Elizabeth, and they hold her down on the ground by her arms and legs. Jennifer is screaming. Frank Sandoval will later admit that he didn't want to get involved. He was too scared. Frank Sandoval and Ramon Sandoval just walk their little asses home for the very next hour. They get home, they get in their house, they get ready for bed, they go to sleep. They don't tell anyone at all that something could be happening down at the park. Back at the park, Peter Cantu wants to fight. This boy has been wanting to fight all night, and even if it's just a 14-year-old girl, Peter Cantu is going to fight. Uni, the 14-year-old boy, is looking on, scared as hell. He is watching his brother Joe carry Elizabeth over his shoulder and down to the railroad tracks. Efrain Perez decides that he's going to help Joe hold Elizabeth down. And Elizabeth is screaming loud. Elizabeth isn't crying. She's screaming. She's loud and defiant. At the same time, Joe takes Elizabeth to the patch of dirt in the grass. Joe was taunting Elizabeth, telling her to take her clothes off, calling her a bitch, and little Uni is just standing there watching the whole thing as he sees his brother start to sexually assault Elizabeth. I have like all of the details of what happened written down in front of me, and I can't say the next stuff. I can't. I have been debating for weeks now, putting this story together, how I was going to tell you guys what happens to them, but I can't do it. And I don't think you want to hear it because it's in my head forever now. And I don't want you to hear it, but, Elizabeth and Jennifer are going to go through an hour of the most disgusting, brutal, vile rape that I can even imagine in my head. So that is going to happen to a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old girl for an hour. Everyone's watching. Everyone's cheering everyone on as one boy goes to the girl and another boy goes to the girl. The other boys just stand around cheering the same way that they did during Raul's initiation into the gang. And the things that these boys are chanting are so disgusting. I was taking notes. while reading the book, and I even wrote in my notes in all capital letters, do not say these things on the podcast. These are sick as fuck. So the girls are begging for them to stop. Uni is still just looking on in terror. He doesn't know what to do. He's kind of just frozen. He's begging his brother to leave, pleading with him that he is scared. He does not want to be here. And instead of stopping and helping his brother, Joe forces his 14-year-old brother to take a turn. And he does. Joe asks Elizabeth what her name is, and Elizabeth lies, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to make it through this part. Shit. Elizabeth says that her name is Melissa, and Melissa is Elizabeth's mother's name. Then Joe asks Elizabeth for her phone number, and he's laughing at her, and Elizabeth gives a fake phone number, and Joe is thinking, oh, this is so crazy. We got this girl to give us her phone number. This is the point where I turned off the audiobook when I was listening to the audio version. Turn that off, and so we're going to skip ahead now. So it's been an hour, and Peter Cantu decides at this point they're going to have to kill the girls. He tells the other teen boys, we're going to have to kill them. They've seen our faces. We cannot leave behind any witnesses. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on this next part. Just wanted to give another trigger warning in describing the crime scene in the murder of Jennifer and Elizabeth. Peter Cantu grabs Elizabeth by the arms. The other boys grab her legs and they carry Elizabeth to the woods. Sean, Raul, and Jennifer walk to the same dirt spot where the boys fought earlier that night. Raul tells Jennifer to get on her knees, and he wraps a red belt around her neck and pulls on the belt from behind. This entire time, these boys make Elizabeth watch the murder of her best friend. Sean and Raul both pull on a red belt that one of the boys was wearing. Pull on that belt that's wrapped around Jennifer's neck, and both boys kill Jennifer. Elizabeth is watching. Joe and Peter grab a shoelace and wrap that around Elizabeth's neck. Peter kicks Elizabeth in the face with his steel-toe boots, knocking out 3 of her teeth and kicking her in the ribs, breaking her ribs. Joe and Peter hear Jennifer gasping for air, and this is when they realize Jennifer is not dead. So Raul walks up to Jennifer's body and stands on her throat. The other boys will continue to stomp on Elizabeth's face and body, then stomp on Jennifer's body. "14-year-old Uni Medellin stood outside of the wooded area where this took place, just standing there in shock, frightened. Soon, the boys come out of the woods without the girls, and they all get into a car to drive home. And this drive home is completely silent. Nobody's speaking to each other. Peter Cantu is the first one to start talking, and he says to Uni, "Take this watch." And he throws Jennifer's goofy watch at Uni. Peter also stole Elizabeth's ring that had an E on it, and he gave it to Joe Medellin to give to his girlfriend, Esther. And now we are back at part 1, the very beginning of part 1, where I told you that the boys arrived at Peter Cantu's brother's house, Joe Cantu. And these teen boys were treating Joe's wife, Christina, with a lot of disrespect. And these boys are bragging about what they just did at the park. To recap, these boys show up at Joe and Christina Cantu's home. They walk in, they are covered in blood. Their clothes are covered in blood. They have scrapes on them. They're a mess. Joe Medellin is laughing, having the time of his life, telling Joe Cantu and Christina that, oh, you're going to be hearing about this on the news later. Christina is freaking out. She feels like she is definitely in the presence of murderers and rapists. And something about Christina that I didn't tell you in the first episode. Christina was the victim of a gang rape 1 year earlier. So she's extremely frightened and triggered right now. She is speaking to her husband, Joe, outside of the home while all of the boys are still inside. And she tells Joe, something is not right about this, Joe. We have to do something. Christina cannot act like she is frightened at all in front of these teenagers. She's back in her home, and Joe Medellin is still going off, laughing about what they did. Joe is saying crazy things. He's saying, I'm going to take a bath because I have blood all over my underwear. Virgin blood. And Peter is standing there saying things like, we had to kill them. We had to kill them. We couldn't let them turn us in. Joe Cantu asks the teenagers how they murdered the girls. And right there in his home, the boys confess and tell the entire story. The boys soon leave Joe and Christina Cantu's home. Peter is the only one to stay. He stays over the night at his brother's house. Around 2 a.m., Sean O'Brien is at his own home and he is unable to sleep. He cannot handle what they did. He's not acting like a tough guy anymore. He's getting worried, and he states that he could hear the girls crying in his room. He's hearing voices in his head now. Sean leaves his home at 2 a.m. and goes back to the scene of the crime because he couldn't sleep. He keeps hearing someone whisper his name in the woods. Sean runs as fast as he can away from the scene, but he immediately gets home and he tries to call Peter. He calls Peter at Joe Cantu's house. Joe Cantu answers and tells him, listen, man, Peter's asleep. Sean is just begging. No, I need to talk to Peter. I can't handle this anymore. So Joe wakes his brother Peter up and tells him, yo, dude, your bro is losing it. You need to get up and you need to go have a talk with him right now. Meanwhile, Jennifer's mother, Sandra, wakes up startled, her heart racing as she glances at the clock. It was 6:30 a.m. and her daughter had not come home. Something wasn't right. Jennifer was so good about checking in. She always returned by this time. But this felt different. Sandra is unable to shake this unsettling feeling in her gut. She hasn't heard from her daughter all night. Meanwhile, Randy Ertman, Jennifer's father, also wakes up and his chest is tight with unease. He glances at his watch, same time, 6:30. Jennifer's still not home, no call, no beep, no nothing. This was completely out of character. He tried to push this worry away, telling himself that it was just a late night, but deep down, he knew. Without a second thought, Randy Ertman rushed over to the Peña's house, knocking frantically on their door. No answer. His worry turns to panic. He's banging harder on the door. His fists are pounding the wood. He is so desperate to find any sign that Jennifer is okay. After 15 minutes, Randy, with just frayed nerves, gets back into his car and he drives home. But his stomach is turning and he couldn't rest. He couldn't sit still. So he goes back to the Peña house, and this time he knocked so hard that neighbors were coming out of other houses asking him, what do you need? Is everything okay? No one is answering because the Peñas are at work. Melissa Peña is oblivious to this panic unraveling all around her. She tried to page Jennifer, assuming that she and Elizabeth were just asleep, and now the Peñas think Elizabeth slept at Jennifer's house, and the Ertmans think Jennifer slept at Elizabeth's house. So Elizabeth Pena thinks, okay, maybe the girls had a rough night. They're still asleep. But now her anxiety is growing. It is now 2 p.m. and Randy is frantic. He decides he's going to go to Gina's house. Gina was the friend that Jennifer and Elizabeth were hanging out with the night before. He bangs on Gina's door, and a teenage Gina is so frightened when she sees Randy Ertman acting so crazy at her front door. He's like, Have you seen Jennifer? He sounds very demanding. He sounds very scared. Gina tries paging the girls, and there's no answer. And now this is only going to make Randy's fear heightened. He begs Gina to come with him to the Peña house, and Gina told him that Jennifer and Elizabeth had taken a shortcut to Elizabeth's house that night. This is when Randy's mind starts spinning. Like, what happened on this shortcut? And his panic is turned to a crazed urgency as he begins banging on the windows of the Peña house, hoping and praying that someone would finally answer. The neighbors are again gathering on the street. They're watching all of this chaos unfold. The word is now spreading that Jennifer and Elizabeth never came home. Randy and Gina call all of Jennifer and Elizabeth's friends. They're trying to track her down, but not one friend has seen or heard from them. The girls' parents try to contact police. They try to get help, but police are just not interested in helping at this point. I mean, they're teenage girls. They'll probably come home soon. So the families and all of the friends start hanging up their own flyers all over town. A local print shop even prints flyers for free for the families, and they help out. Friends and families handing out flyers everywhere. These flyers have a phone number so you can contact the families or Crime Stoppers if you know any information. And it might come as no surprise to you true crime aficionados that there were people prank calling the family. Prank calling this family in distress and telling them they know where the girls are. They saw the girls. All lies. It's so disgusting. But thankfully, across town, Christina cannot handle it anymore. She is losing her mind. She doesn't know what to do with this information that had been given to her the night before by these teenage boys. So she asks her husband Joe to go on a walk with her. And as they're walking around the neighborhood, she tells Joe, "I can't do this anymore." Joe doesn't say anything. He just stops. He stays silent for a little bit. He stares at Christina, and then he finally says, "Christina, they're family." And Christina just shoots back, "No, they're your family, not mine. What if this was your sister? What if this was your mom?" Christina's just hysterically crying. Joe doesn't say anything right away. He just stands there. And then he finally says, "But it wasn't. It wasn't my sister. It wasn't my mom." Christina loses it. "Joe, why are you protecting them? Why?" "Because he is my brother, Christina," Joe answers. And Christina can't take it anymore. She starts screaming, "Joe, call the cops. Call the cops, Joe. Joe, you have to call Crime Stoppers and do something, or I am leaving." Her voice is breaking. Joe is witnessing his wife just deteriorate. She can't handle this anymore. He knows there's no more waiting. There's no more pretending. Joe is going to have to turn his brother in, and he calls Crime Stoppers anonymously. He tells them that his name is Gonzalez, and he knows where they can find those girls. Now, you have to keep in mind here that at this point, the media and the police are not speaking to the families. Nobody's taking it that seriously at this point. So Randy Ertman is making it his own mission to attend any sort of media or press conference that's happening in town. And at that point, there was an anti-death rally happening in town, and all of the media cameras were there. So Randy went there to try and get in front of a camera on his own and talk about Jennifer and Elizabeth and how they are missing and we need the public's help. But while Randy is at this anti-death rally, he hears one of the news trucks get a call over their speaker in the car, and the call is telling them to get to TC Jester Park right away with the van and the cameras because they just found the bodies of 2 young girls because of an anonymous call that came from Crime Stoppers. So Randy Ertman, the badass that man is, he tells one of the media truck drivers, I'm coming with you to the park now." At this point, police and media have gathered at TC Jester Park. It is Sunday, June 27th, 1993. Almost 2 days since the girls went missing. Many of their friends show up at the park. Everyone's waiting to hear if the 2 bodies found were Jennifer and Elizabeth. One of Jennifer's friends notices that a boy from her class is also at the park, and this boy was Sean O'Brien. Now, this friend didn't really know Sean O'Brien, she just knew of him, but she took note of the fact that, oh, I know that guy, that's Sean O'Brien, he's in one of my classes. Sean was there with two little kids that he was babysitting, and he was heard by numerous people telling the kids, man, I hope they catch whoever did this. I'm never bringing you kids here again. This park is dangerous. Randy Ertman arrives at TC Jester Park, and there is actual video of this from a helicopter, a camera up in the sky. I have some of it posted on my Instagram page at Residue Podcast, but it is incredibly heartbreaking. Randy just jumps out of the van. He starts running through this field, running towards this group of police officers begging to let him into the woods. He knows that it's his daughter. He needs to see, and the officers are just holding him back. They are begging him, sir, you cannot see what we saw in those woods. This is not good. In fact, officers let Randy know they're going to need dental records to identify the body that they found in the woods. So Randy rushes home to call Jennifer's dentist and get a copy of her dental records. And you have to remember right here that neither family has been contacted by the police. The Peñas have heard nothing. The only reason that Randy knows anything is because he jumped his ass in a van and went there and found out on his own. Adolf Peña is in a state of shock because he never heard the news from the police at all. He hears it on the news, watching TV. Police never contacted the Peñas or the Ertmans. So now Adolf is in a state of shock, and Jennifer's mom hears the news from her frantic husband come running into the house. She faints, has to be taken to the hospital. They have to give her a sedative because she cannot handle what is happening right now. And still, no word from the police. The families do start hearing from the media, though, because the media wants some comments on what is happening for their news story. And Adolf Peña is not having it. He is pissed off. He tells the media, get the fuck out of my face. Get your ass out of my face. We begged you for help days ago, and you wouldn't help us. And now you show up? At the crime scene, officers had requested dental records from Randy Ertman because when the girls' bodies were found 4 days after they had gone missing, they were significantly decomposed. The weather at that time in Texas was extremely hot. The book Pure Murder goes really deep into details of what the crime scene looked like. I am telling you, I have never heard stuff like this described the way that it was described, and just another part of that book that wrecked me for life. Randy Ertman was very lucky that the officers on scene would not let him into those woods. Also, in the beginning of the search for the girls, before anyone knew where they were, Adolf Peña, he was searching on his own and just walking around random parts in town where he thought his daughter might be. He did actually end up in the woods at TC Jester Park, but later described that he had a feeling, something told him, don't go into the woods. And he is so thankful that he did not go into the woods that day. The autopsy revealed that the death of both girls was strangulation. Although Joe Cantu tried to call in the tip anonymously to Crime Stoppers, it didn't take very long for police to figure out that the call did in fact come from the Cantu house. After speaking with Joe and Christina, police learn who the 8 teenage boys were. Police decide that to arrest the boys, they should do every single arrest at the same exact time. And this is so no one can warn anyone what's about to happen. Peter, Joe, Ephraim, and Uni all went down with no incident at the time of their arrest. Sean O'Brien tried to escape, but he was caught very quickly. Police knew they had a 6th person that they needed to arrest. They just didn't know his name yet. So at one point, one of the officers has, I think it's Sean, inside of the car. And they kind of say, hey, where's the other guy live? And this is when they give up Raul's name. All 6 of the boys are separated and questioned in separate rooms. All of them admit that they were there. and most of them were laying blame on someone else. None of them were taking any responsibility for what actually happened. They would say things like, yeah, I was there, but he is the one that assaulted her. He is the one that killed her. Just placing blame all over the place. Police are finally able to create a picture of what happened that night. And let me tell you something. These boys are being questioned, and the Peñas are still not contacted about the arrest. Nothing. No word from the police. The Peñas learn of the arrest from the media. Adolf says, I was expecting 1, maybe 2 killers. If there were that many of them, surely one would have sense to say, hey, let's not do this. But not one. Adolf says that he praised Christina every day. All suspects except Raul and Uni had a bond hearing for $100K each. They were then given the perp walk, and they're being handcuffed and walked down the street with all the video cameras, all the media surrounding them, reporters shoving mics into their faces. And you have to see this video of Peter Cantu being walked into the courthouse. Joe Medellin was also trying to be a badass. He was yelling at the cameraman like, I'm going to mess you up, man, to the cameraman. But Peter Cantu was throwing this kicking and screaming fit. He was described as like some kind of wild animal. A news reporter walked up to him, put her microphone in his face and asked, did you call Jennifer a bitch? And Peter Cantu answers back, I called your mama that. This kid is just so fucking ridiculous. In jail, these teenagers were labeled child rapists, and we all know that that is not good when you are in jail. One day before a court hearing, the other inmates held the boys down and scribbled all over the back of their uniforms. They wrote things on each boy like, I'm a bitch, I'm a baby killer, and those boys had to walk in front of the judge with all of those sayings all over the back of their uniforms. Jennifer's funeral was held first. Randy Ertman couldn't give his eulogy. He had to have one of his friends stand up and do it for him. There were hundreds of kids inside and outside of that funeral parlor. This is what was said at Jennifer's eulogy. Jennifer, we love you. We need you. We miss you. We are here for you. At Elizabeth Pena's funeral, the same scenario, hundreds of kids, hundreds of friends, family, and they all stood in front of the media cameras to block the view of the funeral. Elizabeth and Jennifer are buried 100 yards from each other. There was also a memorial held for both girls. At least 125 people carried votive candles and held a memorial for their best friends. Several Houston police officers showed up at this memorial, and Elizabeth's father, Adolf, says to all of these children that showed up, he says, you guys can come over anytime you want. You guys need someone to talk to? Do you need someone to listen to you? Well, you are welcome in our home. And let me tell you, those kids did show up, and they showed up a lot. The families of Jennifer and Elizabeth start receiving so much support from all around the world. They're even getting letters from people in Japan expressing how sad they are and how much they feel for these families. They got a family letter from Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton wrote all the families a letter. He said in that letter that he was deeply affected. Quote, we should work together as parents, neighbors, and law official. Randy Ertman said that the letter helped him out a lot and that he planned to get together with victims' rights advocacy. Adolf Peña said the letter was moving. He says, we got this big old envelope that said the White House on it. I thought that meant something was wrong with the upcoming trial, but it wasn't. And speaking of the upcoming trial, the prosecutor wanted to speak to a grand jury in regards to Uni Medellin, saying that he should be sent to a maximum state security known as the Getting State School. He was 14, and he would stay at this state school until he was 18. And then, if he stays clean, he could be freed with probation at age 18. But Uni Medellin was charged with capital murder that day. The other 5 boys would be charged with capital murder and receive a death penalty sentence. And just like the families are receiving mail from all across the world, the boys are also receiving mail, and you know what kind of mail they're receiving. They're receiving fucking fan mail from girls. Efrain Perez gets a letter from this girl who's only 14. She tells him in this letter, hey, you better watch out because the families are pushing for the death penalty. And if they do give you the death penalty, we are going to go on strike. All of us girls have started a little fan club, and we're going to go on strike for you. This girl writes the following words in this letter. All of this because them fine-ass girls you wanted to do, especially the white one. She looked good, huh, Junior? What the fuck is wrong with these women who are fucking attracted to these scums? And she's not even a woman. She's a 14-year-old girl writing this shit and sending it off to a prison to a teenager who raped and murdered 2 girls. So dreamy. And for some reason, Sean O'Brien is getting the most media attention, so the judge slapped a gag order on him. At this point, a large trial scenario is really being pushed hard. They wanted to try all 6 boys at once, and that way the families wouldn't have to sit through every single trial, and that would save the taxpayers millions. But the defense believed that a large trial scenario would just end up breaking out into chaos, and Adolf Peña recalled that he wanted to attend every single trial. He doesn't care. He's going to all of them. The judge was convinced that 5 trials held simultaneously could work. In February 1994, jury selection began. In April 1994, that was supposed to be the start of the trial, but the grand jury chief had been indicted for writing a hot check to an auto repair shop. So he had to toss all 525 criminal cases that this judge oversaw, and this included Jennifer and Elizabeth's case. So they had to start over, and they had to go back to another grand jury. This time, jurors were not interviewed separately. They were broken into small groups and asked their stance on the death penalty. Uni Medellin testifies against everyone except his brother, and he becomes the state's key witness. Uni was not charged in connection with Elizabeth's rape, but was given a 40-year sentence for Jennifer. Peter Cantu is the first to go to trial, and he would just sit there smiling, drawing, laughing. Looks like he doesn't have a care in the world. Did not take long for the jury to find Peter Cantu guilty, and he was sentenced to death. This is a landmark case because this is the first time in Texas history that a judge allowed a family member to give a victim impact statement. Now, Adolf Pena refused to get up and say anything, but Randy Ertman, that force of nature, he got up there and he screams at Peter Cantu. There is video of this. You can find it online. It is heart-wrenching. Randy and Adolf actually found comfort in each other. The details in this trial were obviously unbearable, and these 2 fathers leaned on each other through the entire trial process. Sean O'Brien was next on trial. He was implicated in another murder. Right before his trial happened, Sean O'Brien was accused of the murder of Patricia Lopez. Patricia Lopez's partially nude body was found in a park in 1993, just 6 months before Jennifer and Elizabeth were raped and murdered. Patricia Lopez was stabbed and her throat was slit. Sean O'Brien's fingerprints were found on her at the scene, and they later found Joe Medellin's DNA on Patricia's body. No one was ever charged with her murder, but the details of this were presented in Sean O'Brien and Joe Medellin's case. Also, Didn't take the jury very long to figure out that Sean O'Brien is found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death. It only took the jury 30 minutes to find Sean O'Brien guilty. Adolph Peña would say outside of the courtroom and to the media, why can't they put a belt around their neck? Why can't they stomp them down until they're dead? After Sean's trial, it was decided that Joe Medellin, Raul Villarreal, and Efrain Perez would all be tried at the same time in the same courthouse with different witnesses and different juries. So the parents of Jennifer and Elizabeth all divided up and each went to separate trials so that someone could be there for each girl. This would be the most death penalties ever in a single criminal incident. All 5 who were able to be sentenced to death were Uni Medellin was only 14 and he was the key witness, so he wasn't given a death sentence, but the 5 remaining boys were. In 16 months, justice had been served for Jennifer and Elizabeth, but it was far from over. Randy Ertman wanted to be there when the boys were executed. Victims' families were prohibited by policy from ever being in the room when someone is put to death. But the Ertmans and the Peñas fought for this to change. They weren't going to be able to pass a new law, so instead they would get the policy changed. Board of Criminal Justice meetings were held and attended by both families, and the policy was changed. The executions of Efrain Perez and Raul Villarreal would soon be overturned. Roper versus Simmons. This is a separate case. In 2005, 11 years after the murders, ruled that executing a person under the age of 18 at the time they committed a murder would be a violation of constitutional rights. So Efrain and Raul were now sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. Life without the possibility of parole was not an option in Texas until later that year in 2005. Raul and Efrain are eligible for parole in 2029. It just seems like these families are getting hit over and over with more bad news. The following months after this sentence was overturned, the families are now hit with another obstacle. Joe Medellin claims that since he was a Mexican national, he should have had a member of the Mexican consulate by his side at the time of his arrest. The Supreme Court decided to hear this case, but they dismissed it 2 months later. So the execution was still on track for Joe Medellin, but President George W. Bush orders hearings for all 51 Mexican nationals that are currently on death row, and this includes Joe Medellin. And now the families think, okay, so now this motherfucker's going to get off on a technicality? No. Joe's death sentence remained. To recap, Uni Medellin, 40-year sentence, the most possible longest sentence he could get as an underage child for committing the crime that he committed. Efrain Perez and Raul Villarreal are now sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Peter Cantu, Sean O'Brien, and Joe Medellin are still sentenced to death. Sean O'Brien is the first to be executed on July 11th, 2006. Both families did attend this execution. As they entered the prison, they were gifted with cookies from the other inmates. Adolph Peña even joked, like, these were made by inmates, I don't want to eat these. But the prison officials told the families that, listen, hey, these inmates actually feel for you. They do not like these boys here in this prison. They call these condolence cookies, and they wanted to gift you. The families would later say that Sean O'Brien was the only one to give a heartfelt apology to the families. He apologized to his family and to the families of Jennifer and Elizabeth right before he was executed by lethal injection. Anti-death penalty advocates, they came forward. They said that capital punishment is a cruel and unusual form of punishment, and Adolph Peña responded with the fact that he watched this death occur and it took only 20 seconds. And then he added, "I wish to God that my daughter could have died that easily. Put a needle in her arm and just go to sleep. I wish to hell he could have died the way that she died." On August 5th, 2008, at 9:57 p.m., Jose Joe Medellin was executed. And finally, 17 years after the murders, Peter Cantu was executed on August 17th, 2010. His lethal injection was performed at 6:09 p.m. and at 6:17 p.m., Peter Cantu was officially pronounced dead. He declined to make any final statement before his execution. Before he was executed, they asked Peter Cantu if he had any last words, and Peter said, "I will never forget." Then he looked up at the ceiling and he goes, "Nah." And that was it. Adolf and Melissa Pena say that they had no choice but to go on. They had to learn how to survive because they had 2 other children. And according to a 2006 Houston Cron article, the couple became grandparents. They said they were saved by their 2 children who gave them a reason to wake each morning. But Randy and Sandra Ertman had only Jennifer, and they worked so hard to have their miracle baby. They harnessed their pain for change. So 2 positives come out of this: victim impact statements and the power for families to witness the executions. For years, Randy Ertman saw escape through alcohol, but gained a sober life with the help of his wife, Sandy. Sadly, Randy Ertman died of lung cancer on August 18th, 2014. Joe Medellin, Peter Cantu, and Sean O'Brien are all buried in the largest prison cemetery in the state of Texas, the Captain Joe Bird Cemetery. And this is a prisoner's cemetery for prisoners whose families won't claim them. Efrain Perez and Raul Villarreal are nearing 50 years old, and they are eligible for parole in the year 2029. In June of 2023, nearly 30 years after the murders, Uni Medellin talks with reporters from his prison. At age 44 during this interview, he tells reporters that this was the very first night he ever hung out with his brothers and his friends. He says that he was too scared at that age to help. He says he is so sorry and wishes he could take it all back. Uni Medellin was very proud to show off that he got his GED and his associate's degree, and he has become an artist at the prison. He says that he has stayed away from all gangs in prison because he has an end date to his sentence. He is the only one of the teen boys that has an end date, and he has hope he will be able to leave one day. He was denied parole in October of 2020, and if he serves his full sentence, he could be released in 2033. Well, Jennifer and Elizabeth don't get to express their artistic side. They don't get to get their GED, get an associate's degree. The world never got to see what Jennifer and Elizabeth could have been. These 2 bright, adventurous teenage girls taken so abruptly and so horrifically, their future stolen, leaving gaping holes in the hearts of everyone who knew them. The evening that they were taken from this world was like any other evening for them. They were hanging out with their friends. They were trying to get home for curfew. They walked down that path not knowing that the world they had known was about to just slip away. Unimaginable grief for those parents. This is a pain that no one should ever have to bear. This was so overwhelming that Jennifer and Elizabeth's families knew one thing. They couldn't let their daughters' deaths be in vain, so they fought. They fought for justice, and not just for their girls, but for every parent who fears this same fate. They fought for the world to know what happened and how. In that moment, the lives of two beautiful girls were reduced to a cruel, senseless tragedy. These parents fought for those responsible to face the truth, to face the consequences of their actions, and take responsibility. This legal battle was long. It was agonizing. There were days they felt like giving up. But Jennifer and Elizabeth's parents were not the kind of people who could back down. Their love for their daughters drove them forward. It gave them strength that they didn't know that they had. Every court appearance, every hearing, just another painful reminder of what was lost. But it was also a chance to fight, a chance to make sure their daughters' names would not be forgotten. And in the end, that paid off. Injustice, it's never going to fully heal these wounds. Those responsible were held accountable. Their actions were no longer hidden in the shadows. The families took comfort in knowing that Jennifer and Elizabeth's story would live on, that their legacy would not be defined by the tragedy, but by the fight for what was right. Jennifer and Elizabeth may not have gotten the chance to experience life, but their parents made sure the world would know that they mattered. They mattered, and their lives, so full of promise, would never be forgotten. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Residue. Thank you so much for sticking around with me. This one wrecked me, broke my heart. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you for coming back every week. As you know, Residue is written, produced, hosted, researched, edited by me, Chrissy Champagne. I hope to see you guys next week, and I would love it if you could follow me on social media. Instagram at Residue Podcast, TikTok at Residue Podcast, Facebook, Residue, a true crime podcast. And if you wanted to help out the show, the greatest thing to do is just share my episodes. Hit that follow button, follow the show so I know you're there. And the most special and best thing that you could do is leave a review, a positive review, a 5-star review. Let me know what you love about the show. And don't forget, if you leave a positive 5-star review and you DM me your review, I'm going to send you some stickers and a cute little thank you note. Until next time, you guys, I would love it if you could stay safe and stay paranoid.